Hello and Merry Christmas. I hope that you're able to meet up with your loved ones over this time. It's been a difficult year for everybody all around the world with COVID. And I guess particularly here in Australia, what we seem to hear an awful lot about lately is our health and our health system and making sure it doesn't get overrun. And this is all very important and essential for all of us. It's part of the common good, and we should all do our best as Christians to manifest our love of neighbour by helping our society and our government to do the best to protect us. However, in a lot of the argument about health, most of it seems to be centred around biological health, the health of our bodies, disease prevention, which again, of course, is essential and important. But for Christians and for humans in general, health is more than biological health. There's also emotional health, psychological health, and most important of all, there's spiritual health. All of these things go towards making a healthy human being. And that's why when we celebrate Christmas, we remember too that many of Jesus' miracles began with him forgiving the sins of the person. In other words, healing their spirit, spiritual health, before he then healed their physical ailments. So for Jesus, the important thing was the health of the whole person, holistic health, if you want to call it that way. This feast of Christmas is all about God becoming one of us, the incarnation, in order to heal us, not just to say hi, but to heal us, to transform us, so that we can share in the divine life of the Trinity for eternity. And so over this Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we have different liturgies, and they all have different readings. So the Vigil Reading, there's a genealogy from Matthew, one of my favourite readings. At midnight Mass and in the morning, the dawn Mass, they tend to focus on Luke's Gospel and the story of Jesus being born in Bethlehem and being put in the crib, the manger, and the shepherds coming to visit him and what this all means. And then in the day reading, we have that magnificent prologue from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And I really encourage you to read the Gospels from each of the Masses for Christmas, because they all have something important to tell us when we take them as a whole, not just as individual Gospels. So if we look at the Genealogy of Matthew, which comes from the Vigil Mass for Christmas, we see a lot of names that can be hard to pronounce, but what's more important about that genealogy is that, well, Matthew is trying to show that Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham, but there's a lot else going on in that reading as well. If you look at the names of the people, they're a mix of saints, rogues, adulterers, murderers, and then just ordinary people. In other words, they're a kind of a panorama of the human condition. And they are Jesus' ancestors. This is what God enters into when he becomes human, when he is incarnated. It reminds us that God is not afraid of our mess. And if we're all honest, all of our lives have some mess in them, maybe some more than others, but we all have mess. And God comes to enter into that mess, your mess, my mess, the mess of the whole world. He's not afraid to enter that mess. He comes to meet us, in other words, where we are at in the mess of our lives. But he's not coming to leave us in that mess. He's coming to extricate us from it. He's coming to heal us, to transform us, to feed us. There's a hymn sometimes we use, Come As You Are. I don't like it much. I think it's bad theology because it doesn't emphasise the fact that, yes, Jesus does come where we are to meet us, but he doesn't leave us there. He doesn't want to leave us there. That's why he healed people. That's why he taught us. That's why he called us to repentance. So he comes. That's the power of that, the Gospel, the genealogy account in the Gospel of Matthew. In the midnight Mass and in the dawn Masses, we have the account from Luke of Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem, and it's in Bethlehem, in a stable, because there's nowhere else to go, in a manger. Jesus is born and placed in a manger, And these things have profound importance for us as well, because they show us a little bit about the identity and the mission of God. Bethlehem literally means the house of bread. So the town was the house of bread. So there's some conjecture that perhaps Bethlehem was the bread basket of ancient Israel. So Bethlehem literally means the house of bread. So God is born in the house of bread. And a manger is a food trough for animals. You know, we look at our cribs and they look very cute, and we perhaps don't pick up that important reality, but a manger was a food trough. That's where you put the slops and the food for the animals so that they could come and be sustained. So in other words, Jesus doesn't just come among us to be one of us, but in the symbolism of Bethlehem and in the symbolism of being laid in a manger, we see that Jesus comes to feed us. But not only that, he comes to feed us with himself. He is our food. This cute little baby in the crib, this Jesus who will grow up and die and rise for us, is our food. He feeds us with himself. In the gospel for the day gospel for the Christmas season, we have that, as I said, beautiful prologue from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and everything was made through the Word. The Word was God. And the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us, dwelt among us, so that all of us who accepted him could become children of God. So Jesus, in this gospel, John is reminding us that Jesus being born into time, coming to feed us with himself, is creating a totally new creation. If you are familiar a little bit with the Bible, you will immediately recognize echoes in that first chapter of John with the very first chapter of Genesis, the creation account. So the coming of Jesus at Christmas is the beginning of an utterly new reality, a new creation, and that we are going to be transformed into an utterly new reality. So how does Jesus, coming as a little baby, growing up as a man, how does he feed us? How does he feed us with himself? There is a beautiful image in the Gospel of John where Jesus is emphatic about feeding us with himself, and people find it very hard to take. We might come to that in a minute. Remember that he is the Word. That's what we hear in the Gospel of John. He is the Word who was with God in the beginning, the Word who is God, and through him all things came to be. The Word is what creates reality. And he is the one that feeds us. So the Word feeds us. He feeds us with his Word. In other words, he feeds us with the Scriptures. And he feeds us with the teaching of the church, because that's his Word. But we call this, if you like, the Liturgy of the Word. So first and foremost, Jesus feeds us with his Word, the Liturgy of the Word. But then he feeds us with his body and his blood, because he is the Word made flesh. And as I said, in the Gospel of John, he talks about this very reality. He says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will not have life in you. And the people listening to him, which were mostly his disciples, knew he wasn't speaking metaphorically. They took him literally. And they said, this is intolerable language. Who can accept it? And John tells us that most of his followers from that day left him and did not follow him anymore. And Jesus didn't go after them and say, oh, hang on a minute, you've misunderstood me, I was only speaking symbolically. He just let them go. And he turned to the 12, the inner group of disciples, and he says, do you want to go too? And I think it's Peter that says, to whom shall we go, Lord? You have the words of everlasting life. So he is the Word made flesh who feeds us with his body and blood. And that should sound familiar to you. That's the liturgy of the Eucharist. So the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist, it should sound very familiar. It's the Mass. You know, God has always dealt with his people, and we are no exception as Christians, through covenants. And the Mass, particularly the Sunday Mass, is the liturgy of the new covenant. the new covenant in the blood of Christ. In fact, it is the new covenant. And so the way we renew and stay in the new covenant, which is the entry into the family of God, is by celebrating the liturgy of the new covenant every Sunday, just as we're doing also on Christmas Day. It's in this celebration, in this liturgy, first and foremost, that God feeds us. He feeds us with his word, and he feeds us with his body and blood. He transforms us, and this is the way he saves us. He transforms us, or as the early church father says, he divinizes us. He saves us by transforming us so that we can enter into and share in the very divine life of the Trinity. So if you're watching this video because you're not able to get to Mass this Christmas Day, or if perhaps you've been to Mass and you're watching this video again, and you haven't been to Mass for a while, when you're able to, if you're not well, and if it's just that you haven't been for ages, I invite you to come back and allow Jesus to feed you, which is why he was born in Bethlehem, which is why he taught us, that he healed us, and that he died and rose for us. He's come to feed us. So I wish you a very Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a wonderful time with family and friends if you're able to, and that you have parties. And I know that at this time of the year, people tend to overeat, perhaps overdrink. And, you know, hopefully we'll come to see, though, that the real food we need is Jesus Christ. And we receive him first and foremost in his body, the church, in the liturgy of the new covenant, the Mass. So let's not be content with, the food of the parties, which sometimes can be a bit, like junk food a bit. Let's really ask for real food, the food that will give us the eternal life that we long for, Jesus Christ. Merry Christmas, and may you have a very happy and holy and safe Christmas and New Year, and may the Christ child be born in your hearts so that you'll never be the same again. God bless.